Welcome to Siliconsciousness, the DSR Network podcast focusing on the artificial intelligence revolution, politics, and policy.
This podcast is underwritten in part by the U.S. Embassy of the United Arab Emirates. Its editorial content is completely independent, and the views expressed are exclusively those of participating experts. It is presented live, without editing. For further information about the UAE's efforts in the areas of artificial intelligence and technology, go to the website of the embassy at www.uae-embassy.org and search for UAE-US Tech Cooperation. We thank them for their support. We thank everybody who's supporting this podcast for their support, and we look forward to it developing and growing over time because the issue is so important. Hello and welcome to Siliconsciousness. I'm your host, David Rothkopf, and this week, as every week, we will take a deep dive into some aspect of the AI revolution and the debate around it. We're fortunate this week to have the authors of a new book called The AI Con: How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create the Future We Want, which is out on May 13th. The authors are Dr. Emily Bender, who has been a member of the faculty at the University of Washington since 2003. She is currently a professor in the Department of Linguistics, an adjunct professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, and the director of the Computational Linguistics Laboratory. And we are also joined by Dr. Alex Hanna is Director of Research at the Distributed AI Research Institute, a sociologist by training. Her work centers on the data used in new computational technologies and the ways in which these data exacerbate racial, gender, and class inequality. And Alex, you are the one with the rooster in the background.
I do have a rooster in the background.
We've never had a rooster on Siliconsciousness. And
well, there you go. It brings some bucolicness to the podcast.
Well, thank you for the bucolic flavor. Of course, we're talking about a subject that's not super bucolic, which is AI and the debate around it. And I have to say, I was thinking about this the other day. I like going on social media. And there's now like this whole chorus of, sort of George Orwell, Animal Farm, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad analysis of AI, which is kind of like all AI bad, stop all AI. And then, there are more nuanced views out there, but these have a voice. Talk to us a little bit about where your book is coming from and what specifically it's trying to do in the context of this broader debate.
So my first question is, how many legs does AI have?
Well, that's a good question. As many as it wants is what I think the answer is. But let's discuss your views, not mine.
So I think that the very first thing that has to be done in any of these conversations, and that we do in the book, is to unpack the term artificial intelligence and to sort of look at what it's doing. Because oftentimes in these discussions, it's used as if it refers to a thing in the world, or even a collection of technologies that share something in common. Maybe they are all different variants of the same thing. Maybe they share information between them. And in fact, none of that is true. Artificial intelligence is a marketing term that's getting applied to everything from, image generators to automatic decision systems to recommender systems to spreadsheets if you're trying to attract some investor interest, right? So it is not actually a coherent term. And so if we're going to have this conversation and have it make sense, we have to actually pin down what we mean by artificial intelligence. And so in the book, we give, some of the history of the term, where it came from, and talk about the range of technologies that get sold under that label, and then spend quite a bit of time with the large language models that we like to call synthetic text extruding machines.
Yeah. Well, so that sort of frames where you're coming at it. Where do you land, Alex, in this broader debate? I mean, there's something implied in your subtitle there, but maybe we could tease that out a bit.
Okay, so let's think about the mapping of this debate because I think there's the all AI good, all AI bad, and I'd like to map us in such a space where we're, like there is something implied in it. First off, the notion of what we mean by this. And so we spend most of our times focusing on these synthetic text extruding machines. And for that specifically, we are resolutely against them, but it is grounded in several different things, right? It's grounded in this idea of this notion that these things are doing something that they promise to do, but they're not actually living up to that. Mostly the fact that they are producing word form or document shaped outputs, but with some kind of notion that there is a mind behind those. And so we spent some time doing a bit of analysis focusing on that, but also focusing what kind of effect it has in context, notably in the replacements that they are threatening for everyday work, for social services, for science and creativity, and the data theft and the carbon cost of these tools themselves. So it's not just saying all AI good, all AI bad, but thinking about the production of these tools and the real effects that they have in this world.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really strong point here, which is AI is being used to describe everything. I saw an ad yesterday for an AI-powered pool cleaning device. I mean, as you say, it's a marketing tool, but also AI is not all about what is your term? Synthetic text extrusion. I mean, it is a number of things that mimic intelligence or logical processes, and some of them are quite far afield from synthetic text extrusion, like autonomous weapons platforms, for example, or other kinds of things that use forms of AI synthetic reasoning, and I wonder if part of the problem that we face is our terminology. I mean, I wonder, Emily, if like we can't have a healthy discussion about this because the words that people are using mean different things to different people.
I do think that terminology is part of the problem, and I think that it's not just people have different ideas and we haven't agreed on what words mean. I mean, this is how language works, right? We're constantly negotiating words and how to use them in various spaces, and we do that all the time without problem. I think what's going on here is that a lot of the terminology is being used in a particularly obfuscating way. So if you want to talk about autonomous weapons systems as a kind of synthetic reasoning, I would push you on why are you calling that reasoning? And encourage instead a discussion around talking about things in terms of automation and thinking about what's being automated rather than saying this is an artificial intelligence that's doing something for us. Instead, frame it as we have built an automated system. The automated system takes these inputs, gives those outputs. We choose or not or don't to hook it up to these other systems in the world. And then what happens, right? We had a wonderful conversation on the Our Opinions Are Correct podcast with Charlie Jane Anders and Emily Newitz, where Charlie Jane pointed out that time bombs are autonomous weapons, right? And if you look at it in that sort of continuity, you can say, okay, what's being automated? How well do we understand? How reliable, how sort of consistent is the system? And do we want to use it in this context? And as soon as you talk about that as artificial intelligence, it gets more confusing.
Yeah, and I would also just like to think about stepping back and even thinking about what we say when we talk about mimicking intelligence. I think that word mimicking is doing a lot of it's doing a lot of work here, right? And I think there's a lot of analogs to intelligence that get made. We talk a lot in the book about this notion of intelligence and the way that intelligence itself is a concept that has a very dark history. Metrics of intelligence have been used to justify eugenicist projects and whatnot. Then there's the other side of it is the work that this word mimic is using is, well, what does that mean? Because if we go back even to the histories of the beginnings of the field of artificial intelligence, if you can necessarily call it a coherent field, there was kind of a a sense that neural networks, or the individual neurons of Rosenblatt's original perceptron, was mimicking the human neuron, but that doesn't make reference to actually what the neuron is doing. And insofar as we're using language about it, that matters, because if we're saying neural networks learn like humans do, well, no, they don't. I mean, we don't really know quite well how humans learn, but this kind of reference imbues it with a certain kind of anthropomorphism that is quite dangerous when we go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I wanted to get to before we sort of switch off of this topic. And that is, what harm is there in saying, well, this is AI, or this is mimicking human intelligence. I think some of it's done because what we're doing, and your word automating addresses this, is getting machines to do things people used to do. And when people did them, we said it had to do with their intelligence. And so is it automatically bad to refer to it as artificial intelligence, or are we just jumping the gun on systems that, are increasingly gaining intelligence-like capabilities that are useful to us? I mean, anyway?
There's several harms, and one of the harms has to do with overselling, right? If you set this thing up as human-like, then that sets up expectations about what else it might be able to do. And there's this weird paradox where it's like human-like, but also a computer at the same time. And so you can sell people on technology that is sort of supposed to be all-knowing and unbiased. And then you end up with situations where you end up with, say, government assistance decisions being made by an algorithm because that is better, that is unbiased, and so on. And real harm follows in the world. And people are also often left without recourse if this is done with a system. So anytime you take a system that is specifically designed to do one thing, and keep in mind that the purpose of a large language model is to extrude plausible looking text. That is what it is designed to do. When it's wrapped up in a chatbot interface, that text takes the form of a conversation. That is all it is designed to do. But if you call that intelligent, harm number one, if you call that intelligent, then you lead people to expect it to be able to do things that it can't, and to be useful for things that it's not useful for. The other set of harms have to do with the whole discourse of intelligence, which, as Alex already mentioned, is rooted in eugenicist programs and this idea of sort of ranking people. And then if you have artificial intelligence, then we have this one ranking where you can put all the people and all the machines together in this thing. That sets up all kinds of other harms in terms of our standard systems of oppression.
I would also like to say that, in addition to that, I mean, completely agree with everything. We have to think about the kind of work, that it does when we say that the system hasn't quite learned what to do yet, as if it is making mistakes, and it can be corrected, and it can be taught like a child or something of that nature. So there's some great work by Anna Lauren Hoffman, who is a professor at the iSchool at UW, where she talks about when we use these metaphors of AI systems as children, which is used all over, or learning like a child. I mean, you can pick apart any quotes from, Andrew Ng, Chris Manning, whomever, and, it grants some kind of innocence to systems. They're saying, well, they didn't know yet. We had to give them more training data. And that's often used to justify errors, and things that are errors based on race, gender, whatnot, marginalized status. So they're like, oh, they haven't learned yet. And there's some kind of innocence. And what that does is elide accountability for any kinds of mistakes of the system too. There's kind of other types of things where it is, where that learning is not, any type of learning is not going to resolve that. So hallucinations, which is a term we don't use in the book for many different reasons, but these just flat out mistakes. Because there's no access to meaning or truth in the system, it's not going to learn those out as if a child is going to learns not to touch the stove. That's not going to be trained out. But it is a way to displace accountability.
Well, and I think, just moving on a little bit further with the ideas here, that there are some real risks that we face. We talked a lot in past episodes here about biases that are built into some of these systems. But we're living at a moment, for example, where the United States government has decided that DEI is a bad thing. And you could easily imagine the United States government saying to the Department of Defense, when you spend trillions of dollars developing these systems, you can't have any of that in there, which essentially means you're going to have a different kind of bias in there. And the further we get down that road, the more entrenched biases become embedded in more and more of our systems. And I mean, the question is, do you think, that's the direction that we're headed, where whether these systems are intelligent or not, they end up becoming systems that perpetuates social wrongs and hierarchies that we ought not be perpetuating. Emily.
Yeah. So yes, and just to make sure that we don't gloss over it, when the current U.S. government says we don't want DEI, what they're basically saying is we don't want people to be included. We don't want actual, I hate this term, but meritocracy. We want only white people and Black and brown people, other minorities. No room for you in spaces. Like that's the project. What we often hear about when people are talking about statistical systems, and sorry, there's some cat growling going on in the background, just so listeners know what that sound is. What we often talk about with these systems, you'll hear this phrase, there's unintentional bias, right? And that always sort of rubbed me the wrong way, because it's like, well, whose intentions are we concerned with here? And why is it so important to flag that they didn't mean to do this bias? But it's a fundamental fact of these systems. And, you see this documented over and over again, that if you take underlying data that's got some kind of a statistical pattern in it, and you use it to make decisions or produce outputs that impact the future, you're basically taking the patterns of the past and saying, yes, we want to do more of this. It's exacerbated in the current way these systems are done, even prior to the Trump administration's anti-DEI activities, because the drive is to just ever larger data sets. And we talk about this in the Stochastic Parrots paper, about how you might think that if you just grab everything you can get a hold of, you've got a diverse data set, but that's actually not true, right? Non-curated data is still a set of decisions, and those decisions impact what's in the data set. And if you aren't careful, not only do you get sort of the baseline systems of oppression reflected in your data, but you can actually get worse versions of them. And then the statistical processing is going to amplify whatever patterns are there.
And I should say that there's a lot of choices that are being made and the kind of moves in these systems to quote unquote, I don't know, for better or for worse, or for, I don't like to use this term, but I guess DEI them or something of that nature. I mean, there are choices that are being made there. And those overtures are, playing a pretty dangerous game with the current administrations. For instance, one of the things that OpenAI did in their model specification is that they took this meme directly from something that Elon Musk said, which was, if you pose a chatbot with a question, if it takes misgendering a transgender person, and if you did that and it would stop a nuclear bomb, is it morally correct to do that? First off, this is an absolutely inane sort of thought experiment, right? I mean, this is a very extreme version of a trolley problem, which is, okay, you're not going to be in this situation. And so it literally just in their specification changes it from no, as in kind of this resolute, never misgender a transgender person, to yes, just get, and don't hem and haw about it. And so there are elements of this in which there are these certain kind of decision points that get embedded in the system, but these are clearly kind of political overtures to that. There's kind of a way in which systems like any type, we're seeing the same thing happening with search engines, in which conservatives will say that, okay, there's an anti-conservative bias in this, when we know from many of the platforms, and that's really not true. I mean, there's a full conservative ecosystem that exists on YouTube, on social media and whatnot, that, is due to many of the kind of filter bubble effects, so kind of the outrage effects. I mean, these are things that get more views. And so, yeah, we're going to go down this path, and that's important. but to also know that those are intentional moves by companies and they're situated with a political context. And so, I mean, not that we need even more reason to think about different ways of turning away from these tools, but that's another one. I guess my addition to that is saying that I think a lot of the discussion about biased, I get around bias is missing a lot of the point. Bias is often treated as kind of a technical problem. And the notion is, well, we can fix the bias. And if we fix the bias, then these systems are going to be okay. But that's not really the main thrust. I mean, we talk very little about bias in the book, even though bias is a problem. The larger problem is the replacement of workers with this kind of tooling, the production of synthetic text without a mind behind them in cases where synthetic text is not really needed, or useful, in cases where we'd be much better to refer to a person who can curate text and be helpful stewards of an information ecosystem, the environmental costs and the data theft that is involved in the training data that powers these systems.
So let me move to a different aspect of what you guys are covering here. And you talk about sort of big tech AI hype. And I understand why, but I think that may understate the problem. And I'll try to put this in as brief a form as possible, but there have been some things that have gone on in the United States over the past 40 years which have exacerbated inequality in this country, economic inequality, but also political inequality. And with Citizens United and a number of the decisions that have taken place, more and more of the political authority in this country have shifted to people with the most money because of this erroneous thesis that money is speech. And that, the consequence, which is that people with the most money have the most speech. And a number of things have exacerbated the power of the rich, and we see that in a government with 13 billionaires in the cabinet. But, and you were wondering if I was going to come back to your book, but it has happened at precisely the moment of inflection where the government is coming to grips with this revolution in a bunch of new related technologies, which we can call AI or something else. And so many of the people who have the most money to influence the system the most are the people with the most at stake at this pivotal moment. And it's strange. I live in Washington, as I have for most of the past 30 years. Now Mark Zuckerberg has a house in Washington. Now Jeff Bezos has a house in Washington. Now Elon Musk has a place he lives in. These people didn't want to be here. Now all of a sudden they're here. They're picking the people who are running our government. They're influencing things. And it can't be a coincidence, given that we're right at the moment where we're going to say, well, how do we regulate this? How do we fund this? How do we enter this era? And so to me, when I hear big AI or big tech AI hype, what I think of is big tech AI policy manipulation. And I'm just wondering, Emily, what you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's surely a lot of that going on. I don't know that it's necessarily specific to AI. If you look at the influence that Musk is having across the government and sort of where regulations are being scraped away the most, and then compare that to his businesses, including things like SpaceX, I don't think it's just AI. But yeah, there's definitely been ongoing efforts by the people who are creating these systems. So grabbing everybody's data, amassing compute, and then spilling synthetic media into the world to influence the regulation that's going on. And there's a bunch of, I think, really weaselly tactics that they use. So one thing is to tell the policymakers that they can't possibly keep up with the technology. Only the people who build it understand it, and people who don't understand it shouldn't be regulating it. And that's a conversation that I've heard over and over again. And it completely erases the fact that actually regulations are about protecting rights. rights as people, and you can think about, rights as people to a protected environment, for example, or if you want to talk about rights of the environment, that's fine too. And those things don't move so fast. And all we really need to know about the technology is how might it impinge on those rights, and do we need to erect further protections? But that a lot of policymakers get just bedazzled by the so-called AI, partially due to the hype. And here's another danger to the hype, right? And then they are inclined to believe this idea that this is something so new and so different that we are well behind and none of our existing regulations apply. If you roll back to the previous administration and you saw the work that Lena Khan's FTC was doing, they were doing great. They were not falling for that. They're saying there is no AI loophole. So I do think that we see, unsurprisingly, the more power you amass, the more you are able to influence other dimensions of power. And you're absolutely right to name Citizens United as one of the vectors there.
And I also say, thinking about this as a long history, I mean, I think you're right to point out, in the last 40 years, since Reagan and since a lot of the, major changes in major moves towards deregulation in the government, we've seen this long arc of moving towards, where we are now today, in terms of where we are in terms of deregulation, kind of the defanging of federal labor unions and attacks on organized public sector workers, what goes along with all of that. And I think there's kind of thinking about, it's surely not a coincidence. And we have to also think about how we got here, right? And so a lot has changed even in the past 20-ish years, 25 years. I mean, I think I joked on Blue Sky at one point, the small the kind of domino mean, the small domino mean was Elon Musk and Peter Thiel investing in PayPal, and the big domino is is where we are now with the current administration and growing authoritarianism in the U.S. Right, and so much of this is based in sort of thinking about what kind of economies existed in terms of how much wealth these individuals were able to amass in a rather short period. And that is through a few different eras here. First, kind of the dot-com boom and bust, then the kind of rise of social media and search and ad brokerage as being kind of a major revenue. And we're continuing on now. I mean, Google is not known as the most major player in AI, but they were the research lab that produced the transformer model. The attention is all you need paper came out of Google research, and a few kind of different subsidiaries like DeepMind ended up hiring Jeff Hinton and acquiring his organization through this auction, or this private auction that happened at NeurIPS. And so these things are surely tied together. I mean, this accumulation of wealth, and with it the kind of efforts to influence policy. Oh, I hear a door on your end. I don't know if I should stop. Okay, so this accumulation of wealth, either through ad brokerage, then through social media. I mean, what supports the ad business, the surveillance economy, which people like Shoshana Zuboff describe in her book and whatnot, and then as this new area of growth in terms of quote unquote AI. So it follows that this has been the path for growth, and it has been such a cash cow that, of course, these are going to be the people who are going to have the most, as you said, money is speech, the ability to influence policymakers on the Hill and in state houses across the country. And, but that definitely has its roots in early payment processing, social media, ad brokerage. I mean, it's not like AI came on the scene and then these folks, somehow got a lot of money. I mean, this has been a process going on for, the last 25 years.
Yeah, these are really such important issues, and we've talked about them here over the course of the year and a half we've been doing Still Consciousness, in terms of technical issues, in terms of political issues, but also in terms of philosophical issues, and I think even in the case of this discussion, in terms of linguistic issues, because whether you call it AI or you call it a technological inflection point, the consequences of the new technologies being introduced are massive. They're horizontal. They cut across many aspects of society. And before we support all of them, fund them, enable their advocates, we need to agree on terminology. We need to have a philosophical discussion about what's in the best interest of society. And so I think books like this and discussions like this are, regardless of what role you're playing in this technological transformation, extremely important. The book is The AI Con: How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create the Future We Want. And the authors are Dr. Emily Bender and Dr. Alex Hanna. We are very grateful to you for joining us. Perhaps we will be able to coax you back to talk about more of the issues in the book. But good luck with the launch of the book. It's always an exciting time. And as somebody who's written a lot of books, enervating. So I hope you relax and find ways to enjoy it. And hope that all of you out there will, go read it, get the book. Until next week, I am David Rothkopf, the host here, and we are grateful for you joining the DSR Network and Scylla Consciousness this week and every week. Bye-bye.